please introduce yourself and briefly summarize your education and professional background?
Sure, yes. So I'm Lydia Walpole, Global Senior Director of Performance at Bentley Systems. I am a chartered civil engineer. I am based in the UK. I studied civil engineering at University of Surrey for 5 years, where I completed a master's. I then moved into contracting in the UK. So I really started grassroots as a site engineer on the front line, delivering major infrastructure programs. And that was mainly in the transportation sector, so in rail, highways, but also in water and flood defence. As I started to progress my career from that site engineering to construction management and then project management of these programs, I really started to see the value of digital technology. And at that point, I did a part-time MBA in 2017. And when I came back, I really moved into that digital space and was looking at the adoption and making sure our teams were really seeing the value of that technology. I'm now actually on the advisory board for that university.
I don't talk to people from the UK that often, so I thought we might cover a couple of the
Yeah.
cultural differences. Let's start with your role, the director of performance. What exactly does that mean, and specifically, what are some of the things that you do on a daily basis?
Director of Performance is a relatively new role at Bentley. And what I'm doing is using my industry experience. And I've built a global team to work with our major infrastructure users. And it's about supporting them in the outcomes that they desire. So after 18 years, as I said, in infrastructure delivery, I've got quite a good idea of what accounts and the industry expect from a software vendor. And it's actually much more than just being a vendor. People want a partnership and somebody that they can work with to achieve greater efficiency and allow them to be able to deliver projects faster, safer, and mitigate risk. So that's what we're here to do, is support users in achieving their goals.
Okay, thanks. So before I get to some cultural differences, there's some actual news that came out of the UK recently where they published a 10-year infrastructure strategy. Could you describe the strategy a little bit and explain why it's important for the engineers to know about it, both in the UK and worldwide?
The 10-year infrastructure strategy sets out the long-term investment plan for infrastructure, and that's across both public and private infrastructure. It's backed by around £720 billion, so it's a huge infrastructure investment. The aims, what that will really do is accelerate innovation and improve national living standards. There is an awful lot in there, but some of the highlights for me in the different sectors. In transport, there's the go-ahead for two new major programmes, one of which is the Lower Thames Crossing, which is a new highways project in the southeast of England. And there is also around £2.5 billion being invested in a new east-west rail line as well. But what this plan also does, as well as investing in new infrastructure, there is also a new structures fund. This fund is looking at existing assets on the road network. There's a really great statistic in the UK that 90% of our infrastructure will still be in use by 2030. So as well as new infrastructure, we need to make sure that we are maintaining and looking after our existing assets. So I think that was also a highlight that stood out for me. In other sectors, so in water companies are going to quadruple investment in new water infrastructure over 5 years, so which is a huge acceleration. There's also an impact on flood resilience in the 10-year flood defence investment programme. So those are some of the highlights of what the infrastructure plan is about and what we're investing in the UK. As for why it's 10 years, whilst I don't have the inside scoop on the UK government's reasoning, I do know that we need to prepare infrastructure for long-term resiliency. So infrastructure takes time, it takes decades. And actually in my own career, I spent 7 or 8 years on one programme in particular on a number of different projects. And I think it's quite easy to say that an engineer today could spend their entire career on a programme. So we need to make sure we are we have decade-long strategies that ensure projects align with long-term national priorities, and that we're not falling victim to short-term political cycles. So we've got certainty, and our investors have certainty in UK investment. I think it also enables alignment with climate and resiliency goals. So if you think about targets for net zero, they are also decades ahead. So it's important that we are tracking against those broader national and international commitments. So the other question you asked was, why is that important for engineers across the globe to be aware of? I personally think wherever we see investment, and certainly at this level of investment, we have a duty to ensure that we are using that funding in the best possible way. And if our goal is to ensure that we are improving people's lives, we need to make sure that we are using that investment, making sure that projects are being delivered on time, on budget, and to those outcomes that we anticipated at concept.
All right, that'll make sense. And I could see that, maybe a 5-year plan doesn't cover those things that are in the decades, and like a 20-year plan, it's hard to know what things will be like. So are there plans to revisit this and make another 10-year plan in the next coming years so that it's still current and yet thinking, further down the road as well?
I wouldn't have the exact answer to that, but I believe that is something that it would make sense to do that, to make sure that we've got that long-term resiliency.
Okay, that makes sense. Before I get into some technology questions, just a couple of cultural differences in engineering, since most of our audience is North American. Can you explain some of perhaps the differences that you've noticed working with other groups? I just noticed that you are a chartered engineer as opposed to a PE engineer. And I'm sure there's more. So I'm just, while I've got you here, some things that you've noticed along the way, differences, similarities, and the people that you work with.
I've actually noticed more similarities. So generally speaking, I think the goals of an engineer are universal, and it's similar across the globe. I think we all want to make a difference, make an impact, and particularly in infrastructure, it's so people can live and thrive. My experience in Bentley, now in this global lens, we are working with users all over the world, and I see amazing talent and work being done everywhere. There's obviously different levels of governance across the chartership that you mentioned, the sort of the levels that a professional engineer can achieve, but ultimately those goals are the same. And there are varying levels, varying perspectives, but I think that's what makes us really cohesive actually globally, is you can learn from each other and people are willing to do that.
Do any of the the language or governmental problems come into play, or does the technology kind of help cross those barriers?
I think the technology is it's a universal language, and that really helps with collaboration across multi-geo accounts. So at Bentley, we do a lot of that cross collaboration is across industries, across time zones, and I definitely think technology is a strong player in how we work together.
Okay, well, since we've broken the technology seal, let's talk about some specific examples. As specific as you can, what are some of your favorite technologies, some of the ones that you like to use most, that you think that might have the most importance, the most relevance to global audiences that we're talking to now?
I love this question. So I have come from a time where the goal on site was to stop using paper. So it was, instead of printing out 2D drawings, it was moving away from that, stop physically writing amendments onto drawings and doing red line drawings. And we've achieved that. And I think we should actually look back and celebrate what we have achieved in the industry. I think it's quite easy to forget how far we've come. And I know AI is obviously a popular favourite, and we hear lots of interviews about AI in construction and infrastructure. But for me, I think its digital twin technology can't be overlooked, and that's the one that I would say is my favourite. So I've seen some really great examples of how digital twins are being used. They are redefining how we understand and manage infrastructure. You can create live federated models of physical assets, and you get that continuous flow of insight and data. And again, if we think back to how long these programs last, you can have a digital twin that starts at conception, goes through the whole life cycle of a program, which, as we said, could be 10, 15, 20 years. And then you're still using that digital twin model into the actual asset operations and maintenance. And I think that is a huge step forward for the industry for collaboration, performance optimization, and that scenario planning at every stage. So that would be my favorite, a digital twin. But I think I'm excited to see where AI will take us in the future and how that adapts and develops into the digital twin.
Yeah, I'm sure those technologies are going to converge some. Just before we move on to on the digital twin, I know there's now several definitions, and sometimes it's harder to point out exactly what makes for the digital twin or not a digital twin. Could you describe like a good working example that you've worked with that is what you think a top-notch digital twin?
I would give an example of where a city or a region has done that really well, and that would be in Singapore. So Singapore has a whole city-wide digital twin where they are using the data on their transportation networks, their buildings, their water, and they have really invested in understanding that smart city. So I think that is a great example of a digital twin.
Why were they so successful? Was it because it was so universal? Are they, when they're building it, I know because there's so many buildings, like, is it sensors? Are they scanning everything? What makes it such a comprehensive and an effective tool?
I think why this was successful as well, it's had the adoption because there was vision and leadership. So there was a strategy to develop this digital twin for Singapore. On the technologies part, they used a range of technologies. So it was the models, sensors, so actually having IoT sensors in their infrastructure, and as they're doing new builds, keeping those sensors. It's also enabling future technology. So we talked about AI briefly earlier. I think they are making sure that they are AI enabled for the future, which is another good development into the that full life cycle of a digital twin.
Okay, I also like to try and give as much advice to our fellow readers who are maybe not in your position or leading a large city like Singapore. What are some things that they should be looking at and trying in order to accommodate at least some of these foundational technologies like a digital twin into their own work, whether it's just doing a small bridge at a small town or perhaps something larger? What are some things that you would advise them to keep their eye on?
I think it's important to do proofs of concept. So see good pockets in projects and in regions of where technology, whether it's AI or digital twin, are working really well, testing it and making sure that it's fit for purpose, it's achieving the outcomes that the project desired, and then looking to scale it. And I think that then gives you a really good use case to build on further to enable that scale and adoption.
Moving on, let's talk about AI. What are some of the ways that it's impacted the work that you're doing?
So I'm seeing AI used at enabling decisions, and particularly at the front end. So I'm seeing it used more on projects in the planning and design phase, and it's also I guess it's verifying as well decisions that engineers and planners are making. So seeing that in projects, and for myself is speeding up decision making. So that's the main benefit. It's that pace that AI is giving us.
And I would assume you're using the AI that's in Bentley tools, or do you use it in all of the other different workflow tools that you need to get your job done?
Personally, I'm using things like Copilot and AI tools to help speed up, whether it's presentations and looking at outcomes for our users. But in Bentley tools specifically, we have got tools like OpenSite Plus, where we are now using AI, so users can ask questions and then you'll have a model based on those answers. So yes, it's used both in our everyday working at Bentley, but also enabling that in our future tools.
Before I stop the record button, is there anything you feel like you wanted to add quickly? I know we can get back on some of their technologies, but is any wrap up or something that you want to make sure we include real quick before I stop the record button?
I don't think there's anything additional, but I think if I was to sort of summarize what we've said here and what engineers should take away from this, we talked about this scale of investment, and I do believe we have a duty to make sure we are spending that in the right way, the sustainable way. So we shouldn't take that for granted. We should look at how we can achieve those outcomes with the greatest efficiency. And with that global lens, learn from each other and celebrate those achievements. So don't forget what has already been achieved in the past. And then, yeah, make sure we're celebrating that and learning across the globe.